Alessandro is curator of exhibitions and research at Baltic Center for Contemporary Art, where he has worked for more than 12 years. He's actually taking on new projects now, so that's also part of what we will hear about. But at Baltic, he has worked with several artists making seminal international exhibitions, working with Steve McQueen, Yoko Ono, Elizabeth Price, Rux Media Collective, Bani Abadi, Hadra Wahid, Thomas Saraceno, among others. He's also had significant solo presentations with John Akomfra, and that will also be a project that Alessandro will discuss with us today. He is currently co-curator of a show with Sutapa Biswas at the Baltic and co-curated with Kettle's Yard in Cambridge. And he is further working on as artistic director and curator for a new international Eco Triennale, Eco 08 in Slovenia, and on a project called A Letter to the Future, which takes place in an abandoned textile factory. And we're also going to hear about that project today. Alessandro has maintained a strong commitment to South Asian art and South Asian artists over the years, and is motivated by questions of transnationalism, new forms of assembly, and radical citizenship. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Thank you, Natasha. Can you hear me well? I'm just going to go into.
Yes.
Share screen. Let's see if we can do this. This is working. Is this okay? Everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Do I need this? Do I need that there? That's fine. Okay, so thanks again. Hopefully this is all working now and you can see and you can hear me. I've been thinking so much about what I wanted to say today, and I'm so extremely grateful for Pratik and Priyanka inviting me back to be part of this special occasion, celebrating 10 years of the Experimenter Hub. Now, I thought it was somewhere in the middle of their 10 years. However, when I look at it, I see it was 2013, and I have super fond memories. I left with a rucksack and a suitcase full of amazing memories and moments. And I tell you, I would have been back there at the blink of an eye, would it have been possible? It's also, I mean, I remember meeting Natasha Jinwala at the time, and it has been just so fantastic to see the way that she's become so much part of the Experimenter family. But also, I'm a huge admirer of the extraordinary projects and curatorial insights that Natasha has been involved in. And we do share a real passion for several artists that I've had the pleasure of working with at Baltic. Yeah, there are very few spaces anywhere like Experimenter and Experimenter Hub. It is super unique. I can recall the intensity of the meetings, not just the heat, but the pace, the ideas, the questioning of assumptions, and the intelligent reversal of thinking that was going on. Also, what was amazing and super was the generosity of the audience and to the way that things were just made possible. I really do think Experimenter Hub opened my mind to another way of doing things, of creating exchanges, so different to other conferences about a particular subject. That idea that it is a hub, effectively you sit in the pit or the Greek agora. It's a town hall, it's a citizens' assembly. It is indeed a community with a citizens' assembly. So I'm so grateful to that. Now today, because I'm navigating a slightly different space, and we are definitely at a pause moment, I wanted to start with a few images, cartoons, animations. They're just the way that maybe help us to get through this bizarre times. It is undoubtedly a pause moment, a moment of inflection, and there are certain things that are forcing things to be done in a very different way. And we should, like others have said before me in the last few days and elsewhere, we should make it count. So yeah, the cartoon says, be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. And then of course we have, you know, the idea that there are several areas of overlapping waves and economic precarity is definitely part of that. People will have seen this from their own experience, how COVID-19 has made societal shifts. But we need to be thinking about questions of transparency, of really listening, of deep listening. You know, here's another one. This is from Riddell. When this is all over, what should change? Everything. Okay, really kind of conventional, but actually, it's just worth bearing in mind that it is a systemic moment. It's what that cartoon that I showed before doesn't really show is this idea that actually we need to be thinking about inequity and the idea of social justice. That's been the larger, overlapping to all three of those waves in relation to climate as well. So for everyone, no fixed horizon. It's like being on a boat out at sea, hanging onto a horizon. There's a lot of pitching and tossing. And I have to say, I know this, that fundamentally artists have been way more used to that level of turbulence. But we in public institutions who have been supported with kind of a sense of solidity of what the institution is, are possibly not used to that kind of turbulence. So there is a social imperative to listen, and I talked a little bit about the idea of deep listening, and actually was recently looking at Pauline Oliveiras's ideas around deep listening, but also in relation to climate thinking, it's adaptation. It's really about doing things in a different way. Now, in today's talk, I was going to just share a few areas of research rather than just show a number of slides from past exhibitions. I will do that, but I'm also very keen to point something out. I'm sure other curators, other people involved in delivering projects will be familiar with with a line. There's a line in T.S. Eliot in The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. And I never quite knew what that meant. And I kind of feel I do now, because in a way, in this reflective moment, having worked in an institution for many years, I realize I've absolutely measured out my life through exhibition projects. And if one is involved in a public institution, it's about delivering it through seasons, thinking about a kind of a continual sort of watermill, like churning through of seasons and projects, and it's constant, and I have I know this. So in a way, this idea of how one measures things is interesting. What I would say is a lot of those projects have been at Baltic, and for many years I've been at Baltic, and to be working in a public institution which is free to the public, where actually in more normal times, we talk about normal times, it's 450,000 visitors a year, coming to see our exhibitions. You can guarantee you do an exhibition, it's like visitors come, and it has been a total privilege. But 2010 has been a time of transition, and it's essential to listen to this time of pause and perhaps not doing. And what I do believe is it comes from a far better conception of our place alongside other species being, and full recognition for how our accelerated pace leads us to the precipice. So indeed, the climate crisis is telling us something. And I do believe, and in picking up on some of the things that Rax talked about in relation to discursive justice, distributed discursive justice systems, I do really believe that in 5 years we will see citizens' assemblies and legal frameworks to enforce ecocide as a crime that can be prosecuted at The Hague, the International Court of Justice. And it could even be sooner. I think people within countries can do that. So, yeah. So, just to start in a way, and it's interesting listening to Dorian talking about M+. One of these big capital projects, this was the Baltic in the late 90s before it opened in 2002. And one of the early projects was a kind of outdoor projection using the Truism series projected with xenon projectors on the side of the unbuilt building. I mean, this is kind of like creating a before program. And it's just really about situating the fact that the building is on the river. It's at the heart of kind of industrial Gateshead, Newcastle, a history of shipbuilding and rapid deindustrialization. But the building opened in 2002, and in a way, this is what we're transiting here from 2000 to the idea that actually, you know, one can work with artists again. So actually, much later, we were able to work with Jenny Holzer in the actual galleries in a collaborative exhibition with the MCA Chicago and the Fondation Baylor in Switzerland. Yeah, projects like Yoko Ono, which used the top 2 floors of the galleries, which is about 3,000. The whole building is about 3,000 square meters. You know, making installations. This is part of the exhibition Between the Sky and My Head. Doing outdoor projects with Yoko Ono, such as the I Love You performance with the light and the performance that she was able to do between 2 different buildings. Also in tandem with a large Fluxus exhibition at the same time. These are the kind of substantial projects that, you know, contain many memories of working and ways of doing. So as I mentioned there was Jenny Holzer on the top floor, and this is a piece called For Chicago, but it was part of a string of installations. So I'm going to, the next sort of 6 or 7 slides really around an exhibition that actually was just last year. I will be moving around a little bit in time because I wanted to try and just bring together a couple of areas that are close to my own interest, but also thinking about how working with an artist with a considered practice like John Okomfora and being able to do screenings like historical perspectives of, say, the Black Audio Film Collective, and what that means in relation to what they were talking about through events and talks is something that, you know, is something that means a lot, because if you've been planning an exhibition for a long time, you know the resources it takes to do a John Okomfora exhibition, working with Smoking Dogs teams in a professional and good way, in the way that they would expect. But you know, it's like one of those things. This was just a year ago. This is that kind of sense in which actually it just closed last October, last summer. But I just got a couple of images here that just show the way that the level 3 gallery in this case, and the show was called Ballasts of Memory. And what you're seeing here is just a still from oh, I've forgotten, sorry, it's just come to me. The Unfinished Conversation, the extended 3-screen portrait of Stuart Hall, which is, I've been wanting to show this alongside a much newer film, Precarity. And Precarity told the story of the jazz player, Buddy Bolden from New Orleans, an incredibly profound, perceptive piece of work that combined locations in New Orleans. I think it was shown as part of the New Orleans, and then shown at the Nasher in New Orleans too, as part of that presentation there. So being able to install and bring John and Lena up for a conversation where film screenings, earlier works are presented, it making me think about this idea of questions around this moment, because with Black Lives Matter, you kind of see the importance of understanding communities and justice, and using the archive in a kind of intelligent way to move things on, to move the debate on, and to do it intelligently. So here's a still from Precarity, which is a mesmerizing presentation, which combines sort of those thematics that John replays, but also the sound of water. It's also a deeply psychological portrait and well worth seeing if you get a chance to watch it. Right, so this is where I was thinking about this in relation to the fact that, events, in relation to thinking about something like screenings of the Handsworth handful of songs, for example, at the Tyneside Cinema that we were able to do, or an event at the University of Newcastle at the time, which had John and me in conversation with people. But it's really thinking about the kind of the moment of justice that's been explored through actually say the Colston statue and the kind of the kind of challenge to parts of infrastructure in this way that are systemic questions. So artists though, like John Okomfora, Black Audio Film Collective, they've been exploring this space. If you look, there are moments in those films that monuments are being measured in terms of their meaning. The ideas of empire are being explored. But an artist like Hugh Locke, for example, was working on the Colston site with a project back in 2006. This is called Colston Restoration Series. And it's great to see these images because basically, in a way, it shows that artists are there as part of the kind of the conversation, but also foregrounding it in a way so that actually when momentum happens, when historians and activists work together, you realize that actually the metaphors are there and being created by artists who've been active in questioning, but possibly finding new power in their well, recognition really for the way that they've been thinking, and certainly that's good with some of the artists here I've just been presenting. So yeah, Rax Media. It was such a pleasure to be able to work with Rax Media. It was a good many years ago, and it was on the second floor, and it was called The Things That Happen When Falling in Love. It's a story of how the last of the shipping cranes on Tyneside were being sold off to shipyards in Mumbai and Bangladesh. At the time then, Rax, it really was, Rax wrote, it's an installation that explores the ways that explore ways of life that die and are reborn elsewhere as industries such as shipbuilding relocate from one continent to another. And it was inspired by archival images of giant shipbuilding cranes on a voyage to India from the River Tyne. It reveals a global web of wills and longings that sustain life and encourage unexpected intimacies across vast distances. And it's that reminder of industrial history of the Northeast. And it's so important in a way to see that an artist looking at the kind of historical archive, or even exploring this idea of glitches in the archive, can kind of create new spaces and new ways of thinking about this. And certainly all my interests with artists in the Indian subcontinent, for example, being able to work with Bani Abdi, Section Yellow back in 2011 on the ground floor was really an important body of work to be able to present there. And Bani's work remains a big influence for me, and I know I share that interest with Natasha. And Hajra Waheed, in her installation, which we did called The Ciphers. And indeed that exhibition itself, with this work and this work here, was an extension of a show that Natasha had presented at Kunstwerke in Berlin called Still Against the Sky. And so it was great. I'm at Baltic to be able to collaborate with institutions like Kunstwerke on projects such as this. So now what I wanted to do next was just run you through something that is from way back in time, that is back from 2009, which was, I'm just going to quickly through this. It was a group show around Darwin and evolutionary thinking and the theory of natural selection. That's the title. It was developed by me. But what I wanted to do here was to kind of present how things are reframed differently, importantly, by time. And in a way, last year we did a show called Animalesque, which we're going to see a couple of images of. This is my own thinking in relation to back then, as part of the celebration of thinking around what maybe the Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, could mean, and working with artists like Mark Dion, who are questioning the idea of archive and knowledge systems. But also several of those artists at that time had a chance to go to the Galapagos as part of a research project and make new works around that. And but it was important to kind of have to work with the kind of the historical knowledge in a way of and find a way of getting complex ideas such as the tree that is in Darwin's notebooks out to a kind of a greater understanding. And when you have conversations with artists about the kind of ways of working, you kind of move things on in this way. And I have very strong memories of a piece which we didn't show, but it was basically about Alfred Russel Wallace and in having malarial dreams sort of as part of this. But all of this is saying that these are kind of antiquated ways of dealing with the archive. So at for Mark Dion's installation, we made an installation called Victorian Explorers, which was looking at the trappings of these colonial explorers in a critical way, yes, but actually in a way with not enough nuance if one thinks about the way one thinks about the knowledge system. Yeah, Mark Dion's sort of work was important there, but I just always have stayed with this idea of kind of animal references to the animal world as being a kind of something that continues to be relevant in terms of how we integrate ourselves in relation to other species. So here was a piece by Marcus Coates, British artist, called The Blue-Footed Booby, in which he worked with Ecuadorian sort of Galapagos TV, looking at the nature of the bird itself, the blue-footed booby, and found a way of exploring the story of the booby in relation to and inserted the work back into local television stations. But like I was saying, you talk to artists about ideas, about certain intellectual ideas, and they say, yeah, actually, Darwin was researching earthworms and biospheres and the importance of earthworms. So Tanya Kovacs here made a slice of earth with a kind of a live process in which actually the soil was being recreated over 3 months. And it was a bit like a painting, but actually it was just basically maintaining a biosphere in the gallery. But I mention this because last year we collaborated with the Bildmuseet on a major exhibition curated by the curator Philippa Ramos, and it was with collaboration with Sweden, but it was then presented at Baltic, and this opened just over a year ago at the Baltic, and it had 15, 16 artists, including Pierre Huyghe that you just saw there, Hotsu Nyen with 2 or 3 tigers, Amalia Pica from Argentina but living in London, Paloma Vargas Weiss, but also Mary Beth Edelson, for example, and Simone Forti. So Louise Lawler's profound sound piece, and it crossed generations. This exhibition was called Animalesque Art Across Species and Beings, and it was produced by the Bildmuseet. Sorry. So here's the text, just to show portraying human relations across large-scale video installations, and the crucial. Yet it was kind of doing something else. It was saying animalesque is to resemble animal, to be human, animal-like. The exhibition features art which is soften and distinguishing between humans and animals, and reassessing this wider natural sphere in which all living forms are interconnected. So becoming other, becoming animal. And sorry. So here's Mary Beth Edelson's profound installation across the back wall with Paloma Vargas Weiss. And this fantastic installation by Alora and Calzadilla Hippo, also just which was performed daily with this idea of what's the word? We have whistleblowing in relation to commenting from the newspaper. It's a work that's been shown several times, but it was amazing to find a way to present it at Baltic and to find ways that audiences engage with this. So very, very quickly, I'm just going to go through a couple of exhibitions that have been important for me. So in 2017, Disappearance at Sea is an exhibition, Disappearance at Sea, called Mare Nostrum, which brought together a number of artists, including work from ScanLab projects, forensic architecture, Wolfgang Tillmans, Watch the Men. But importantly, it collaborated with Amnesty International on an educational project to really inform people, because it was really looking at the idea of our sea to draw attention to the lives lost attempting the journey, the perilous journey, as migrants and refugees were crossing the Mediterranean Sea. You know, it involved the Commission for Hrea Sarkisian, looking at that very large, very narrow piece of land between Turkey and Greece. So in a way, it was also trying to explore the idea, the politicized commentary in the media. And this is where the rise of misinformation with the Brexit campaign and also the idea that fake news was alive and well was very much active in this time of understanding. So in a way, the gallery serves as a forum, as an agora for a conversation where you can sign people up to information, to charities. And this way of thinking around citizenship, around creating spaces within the galleries, has been really important, and in a way is helping me inform ideas for going forward around transnational assembly. This was an installation of maps, hand-drawn maps based by the SCART Collective in collaboration with asylum seekers on the border was in Serbia, who were moving through Banja Kobilica camp in Serbia. And had come from many different places. And then there was forensic oceanography, and then scan labs with a sort of VR installation. So 2017, there was a group show that looks at this idea of digital citizenship and the precarious subject, this idea that somehow, you know, artists are aware that technology is being used against us. What are the what is the role of citizens in transnational status? You know, the exhibition draws on that idea on citizenship, but through technology, and questioning almost the idea that fake news, where does it lead, and if we get to zero truth, and what's it doing in relation to ideas of nationalism and an extension of human rights. So that was sort of part of the thematics in it, and it was brilliant to be able to present works by Daniela Ortiz, a performance-based, but also James Bridle with the Citizen X project, Jonas Stahl with the New Unions, which looks at different ways of assembly with political parties in a transnational way. This is Algorithmic Citizenship, Citizen X, Alan Butler. So just in this last section, I wanted to kind of just look at my kind of reading shelf from September, and the kind of books that I was kind of drawing in on, which I don't know if people have had a chance to read: The Uninhabitable Earth, or The Future We Choose, or Consult Drawdown. I mean, these are quite practical things. They're very different to eco-criticism, but this is where I'm going at the moment, and I really value that way of reflecting. In a way, in developing this idea for Eco8, it's an initiative in a former textile mill in Slovenia. It's an invitation that started it was an invitation that came to me like last autumn to kind of come up with some suggestions, and open to suggestions how to bring back a life of a historical eco-triennial. And it was originally planned for autumn 20, but like everything, it's also been postponed and is now due to be presented in May 2021. Now, I was keen to draw this idea that we were experiencing time differently, and the climate crisis was facilitating this. And I came across a widely circulated story of the people of Iceland coming together in August 2019 to create a memorial service for a glacier, the Ocucal Glacier. And I think here's an important thing. It was recognition that what I was reading about is that mourning and grieving was part of it, that it was really the right language to be using. And further looking made me realize that the text commission was a plaque that will stand for generations. And that, so in a way, A Letter to the Future comes very specifically from how do you say goodbye to a glacier? And the words that actually the writer Andrew Snee Magnuson, working with a team of geologists, came up with was Ocucal is Ocucal is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done, and only you know if we did it. Now, it's a powerful plea, and it's a eulogy that throws us forward into the future. And this is the place, and this is the story around that. And it was what's the word? It was really widely publicized and caught the public imagination in August 2019. The key thing, as well as on the plaque, is a little marker that says 415 parts per million, CO2 parts per million. Now, we should know, and this sort of story relates to the idea that actually 350 is the preferred level. And in a way, we're now at 415. And this is really about thinking about parts of the world where, where we all have to work together to effect this sort of change. So basically, yeah, the idea of these industrial spaces, it's a recently vacated textile factory. And up until, say, 8 years ago, there were 200 people working here. Now there's only one with a custodian who has the keys, who is working with the UGM team who have put together this proposal. And it's on the edge of the town of Maribor in eastern Slovenia, and it'll take place in May next year. It's early stages, but it's been in conversation with some 25 artists with the way of trying to present their work. There's lots of opportunity to be conversing with those artists on how to respond to those spaces. This was part of the kind of pre-launch in September, where we were able to bring together 5 artists as part of this. Yeah, it's an exciting project to be looking at. And that book, by Andrew Snee Magnuson, On Time and Water, has just been published in English this summer, and hopefully be published in other places. In America, I know in early 2021. These are some of the spaces. It's a vast space with about 3,000 square meters that we're going to be using over 3 different sites. It'll stay very raw, and there's an enjoyable possibility of trying to open up the spaces and try and reflect on them in this way. So just add that, yeah. So presented in the project is 25 international artists, and it was thinking about now how it combines the idea that actually species coexistence would be forming part of the thematic in relation to this particular book, and A Letter to the Future as part of that. And one of the first pieces of work that we were able to put together was a sound installation called Fairish, which is a recording from an 8-channel recording from Iceland made by Chris Watson. So just in this final section, I wanted to start with something that was really informing my thinking, which is kind of this idea of hidden knowledge and surveillance. Really at the core of everything is this idea that that what we're now aware of is the future has already arrived. It's just not evenly distributed yet. This was a saying from William Gibson, the science fiction writer who lives out in Vancouver. But it was from 2003. It is literally picking up on this idea of pointed inequity and inequality of distribution. And that is something that I think the kind of geographical ideas of inequality are given forensic kind of precision by this moment. I'm massively interested in this idea of citizenship and democracy. So in the last 4 or 5 images here, I'm going to just show you something. And I don't know if you can see that, but Naomi Klein has recently suggested, there were two people that I wanted to mention here, Naomi Klein and Arundhati Roy, because I think both have written fantastic pieces that allow us to start thinking about what it means at this moment in time with coronavirus and how we need to think differently. I mean, how, in a way, other futures can be dreamed. You know, we can go to science fiction in terms of dreaming a world into being, like Ursula Le Guin can tell us. We can read Deborah Haraway and think about ways of you know, staying with the trouble, but actually sometimes we just need to hear it in a fairly simple way. Naomi Klein has recently suggested that the frictionless future is a future which, for the privileged, almost everything is home delivered, either virtually via streaming, cloud technology, or physically via driverless vehicle or drone, then screen shared on a mediated platform. It's a future that employs far fewer teachers, doctors, and drivers. It accepts no cash or credit cards under guise of virus control, and has skeletal mass transit and far less live art. And it's that idea of far less live art. It's not often that Naomi Klein goes into the art territory, but she spoke about it in this way. And I just thought that it was a part of the Frictionless Future it was kind of a workshop that I was doing with some art students recently. It's about thinking that you know, should we accept it, as in, what is it doing to ideas of equality? What is it doing to ways of assembly? And I don't know, I've come across also in lockdown, another artist I was working with, Cara Chin, had researched Arthur Radabo's 1960s Chicago Expo illustrations for newspapers. With 1964, 62, the one before was Walter Molino, 1962, from an Italian newspaper. Push button education, you know, the Zoom classroom, socially distanced. This idea of what the technology companies have got in line for us is something that I think is what was the point of Naomi Klein's article, and that's something that's been influencing my research around this project called Hidden States, the geographies of seeing. But finally, I was really powerfully taken by Arundhati Roy's article, Pandemic as Portal. It came out quite early on during the pandemic. It was a detailed piece in the Financial Times. And one of that counterpoint, even while the virus proliferates, who could not be thrilled by the swell of birdsong in cities, peacocks dancing at traffic crossings, and the silence in the skies? But unlike the flow of capital, this virus seeks proliferation, not profit, and has therefore inadvertently, to some extent, reversed the direction of the flow. It has mocked immigration controls, biometrics, digital surveillance, and every other kind of data analytics, and struck hardest thus far in the richest, most powerful nations of the world, bringing the engine of capitalism to a juddering halt. Temporarily perhaps, but at least long enough for us to examine its parts, make an assessment, and decide whether we want to help fix it or look for a better engine. And as she kind of concludes, the rupture exists, and in the midst of this terrible despair, it's a chance to rethink the doomsday machine that we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their worlds differently. This one is no different. It's a portal and a gateway between one world and the next. And Roy's underlying point, how do we imagine another world? How do we dream ourselves a portal and step lightly through it with little baggage into something new? And I really wanted to end with those words as a way of closing, and so that we could open up for a longer conversation after this. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandro. I wanted to discuss a little bit more in terms of the work of John Akomfrah and your engagement with John Akomfrah, Black Audio Collective. At the same time, really, thinking about these aspects of riots, of protests, culture in the UK from the time of the 80s and the sus laws, etc., that actually propel and that put pressure on also what is happening today in terms of Brexit, in terms of racial violence, and also really this question of, as you were mentioning, of monuments and how commemoration can be destructive and how to perhaps turn it into something that is instructive, which also happens in John's work with Unfinished Conversation and the work of Stuart Hall, where their legacy is commemorated. But then there are these destructive acts in which the UK has a tendency, I would say personally, of even reclaiming the nobility of Churchill, or reclaiming, trying to say, okay, let's tell a multicultural history of the First World War. But then once more, it's flipped into a perspective that suits a rather conservative agenda. So I really want you to kind of break down, what it's meant for you to also work with the South Asian diaspora, with artists of color for a long time, really dealing with these issues, maintaining what Stuart Hall called a double perspective.
Absolutely, and that idea of nuance in terms of how, say, sort of the militarization of the kind of space, for example, might be explored in Hajra's work, for example. That was a big influence for me for the way that one thinks about the hidden, about the disappeared. These are languages that are very, very familiar with artists who are really interested in thinking about archives, what they illuminate and what they occlude. And that occlusion, in a way, is something where you see John Akomfrah talking about documentary, about archives, but of course, it is so much more. The purpose is so much bigger, and I think what's important, in a way, is to see 20 years of Black Audio Film Collective, the Smoking Dogs film as a kind of collective working towards something. I have to say, one of the most powerful, moving sort of interviews I've heard this year, I think, was Tina Campt over in the States interviewing John Akomfrah. I think it was back in May, June, and where depth of practice can be looked at in relation to real world events, with a kind of sense of slowing things down and allowing institutions to sort of say, well, deal with it. Just deal with it. And I mean, it's in a way, at the moment, there's a sense in which institutions, I showed those images about moving with Hugh Locke at the end, because in a way, the discourse is happening beyond the institution. The institution's behind, the museum, the conventional collection, in a way, left behind. Actually, I go back to some of the things that Rax were suggesting around discursive justice. It's alliances between artists not needing the institution, maybe working with, the Hague, or for things like, it's these kind of alliances that maybe find new ways that do that. But just returning, it's the nuance and the slowing things down, and that's where actually galleries do have a role to be these spaces of consideration. So you get it with work where you're understanding and reversing the conversation. It's not just reversing the conversation, it's opening up understanding. But you need to be doing that where the clamor of division is not so much, where the conversation cannot be heard. Galleries can be good places to have those conversations. That may not have answered your question, but it alluded to some of the points.
Thanks. I wonder about the possibility that, you know, the human-animal relation or the multi-species kind of perspective at this point, you know, how to perhaps not romanticize it, you know, at a time like this also, where it can go either way. You know, it can also become quite a superficial reading that doesn't touch upon also this question of which is an endangered species versus, you know, what parts are. I mean, in India, there's various questions about the rights to the forest. There's various aspects of legal violence, you know, through extractive industry, through kind of just thinking about areas that are declared national parks. There's just so much complexity to this debate, whether we're dealing with, you know, the aspect of beyond human life, or we're trying to inhabit a deeper understanding of the climate crisis, or what Naomi Klein calls climate barbarism. You know, how can you go a little bit in depth with how perhaps your inquiries have charted a critical position around these debates?
Well, I mean, the presentation of Animalesque was a very thoughtful presentation, and we had the chance to collaborate with Philippa Ramos's research, because it did offer a kind of, you know, it was not about, it kind of allowed the understanding in relation to the precarity in climate in a way that wasn't being thought about years in the past, but in a way, I would say that this idea of species understanding is to do with a new perception of time. That's what I was kind of trying to allude to in the idea of the geological kind of process of what's happening in the glaciers it's the idea of actually different measures of time coming together, and they're actually we realize that certain ideas of extinction are happening at a rate at a level that puts us into a different place. And I think that's where actually it's good to reread Donna Haraway, Staying with the Trouble, because it allows this it defers this idea of anthropocentric-centered, and that's why actually I don't have an answer in relation to animals at the moment, but I am drawn to works that deal with extinction and that are apologizing for extinctions. For example, a particular work by Marcus Coates, which is called Apology for the Great Auk, and it was a piece that was done in Newfoundland a couple of years ago, where the mayor of Newfoundland was made to give a public apology for the extinction of a bird, the great auk, from that island on Fogo Island as part of a residency. But it's one of those things where humor and profound loss are brought together, and I think that's where this idea of mourning can come in, because basically, it is sobering. We do not need to read eco-criticism. We can listen to David Attenborough doing presentations about extinctions at levels to help galvanize ways of understanding. And then if the artists are exploring the territory in ways, creating metaphors or creating dialogues, we should use that and find ways to channel them into projects.
In relation to your project Digital Citizen, I just wanted to add a thinker that I've come to learn of recently, who deals with algorithmic violence and race in a phenomenal way, is Ruha Benjamin. And she has written this book called Race After Technology, The New Jim Code, in which she states the road to iniquity is paved with technical fixes. I think there's a lot in there, because there is still, despite there being enough and more evidence and knowledge every day as we leave data trails, The point of considering that the internet still bears an ounce of race neutrality is something that she challenges in a fundamental way by bringing forward a term that she calls technological benevolence. So there she's really going very much in depth with younger data scientists who work alongside her students, etc., and social justice, experts who work with internet technology, that really look at how, in fact, the more certain applications convey that they are race neutral, especially hiring algorithms, the more, in fact, on doing deeper searches, one understands that the rules that they are fed are just so deeply flawed and unequal. And so, I mean, this is just something I wanted to, share with you, and wondered if there were specific works in the exhibition that might speak to this.
No, I mean, that's very good observations, and I'll look into that one. I mean, I'm very much taken by Algorithmic Justice League, Joy Bolamwini's sort of campaign, and her film, which came out at Sundance earlier this year, Coded Bias, is a long feature, and indeed that was kind of the dialogue and some of the activities in relation to face recognition that was being used for arrests in May and June during Black Lives Matter protests. That was important to galvanize how algorithmic injustice happens. And there's also Big Brother Watch in the UK that's been doing similar research projects. This is where, in a way, artists are finding these alliances with justice systems. And I'm possibly more interested in the ones that are looking at those kind of alliances with existing justice projects where there are collaborative projects. And sometimes, universities are there to help mediate and support that.
I'll just combine my last question with a note from Luli. I wanted to ask a bit more about what led to, or what you feel really kind of makes a new triennale on art and environment different significantly from any other biennale or triennale. That's something I would like for you to answer. Besides subject matter, like structurally, what does that mean? Because if that's just, it's a very exciting prospect to really think about that, of course, because otherwise to add more triennales, while, I mean, I can tell you it's extremely challenging currently, as many colleagues, Rux as well, but I mean, to even manage what biennale making is in even in an economy like Korea, I mean, it's just, it's sort of like weightlifting, with your brain. It's very, very complex and can feel quite self-defeating at times. So what does that really mean for you? And Lily asks, have you considered Sami artists such as Marat Ansara, whose work, of course, also on reindeer herding, and, again, structural violence against the Sami community, and what, she's going to be part of the Sami Pavilion. Have you considered voices like hers in terms of indigenous stewardship of territory, symbiotic relationships with animals, particularly for the European context?
Both great observations. What's interesting about this eco-triennial is it comes in the history of the republics of Yugoslavia, where actually it's a pre-existing triennial that's just been given new life. So in fact, the first edition was 1980. It was one of those sort of, it happened in 80 and 84, and in a way with the designer Rafaela Drezic, who is working with us, some of the sort of typography from the original 1980s one. I have to say this is going to be a very modest project, and the idea that it was just in a gallery in the past, but actually the use of the textile mill in the town, on the edge of the town, is raw industrial space recently vacated with kind of textile forms, but Sami artists, I was the work of I've been researching the work of like the Miracle Collective, for example, that were presented last year as part of the pavilion. But that really struck me with say Suvi West and Uti Pieski, who I believe I'm seeing some commissions coming up. Certainly interested. Specifically, Animalesque actually was interesting because Philippa Ramos knows the work of Britta Markat-Laba. So Britta Markat-Laba's indigenous, the kind of embroideries which were shown at Documenta, but in a small way were part of Animalesque, and it was a very interesting journey within the building last year to be presenting Britta in a context where ideas of indigenous knowledge was being presented and understood in a way that we'd never done before Baltic.
Great. Thank you so much. There was a question about Animalesque or a duck from Mr. Darwin, but I feel you have answered this question, and we can also continue in the informal discussion where you can share more. I would like to share some concluding words for the formal aspect in closing today's session. Then listening to a lecture by Sheila Membe and also Reem Fada yesterday, quoted from his recent thinking, especially in the way he is currently thinking about technomolecular colonialism. And after writing on necropolitics, moving more into this aspect of how reparation needs to be thought with the earth and toward the earth. Not only reparation in terms of objects, museum objects or infrastructures purely, but really what does it mean to find that aspect of reparation really at a planetary level, and what he considers more as the rights to memory. And so with the way that Naomi Beckwith spoke about the rights to the image as being something that's deeply contested, and when we talk about also monuments that are being torn down because of the destructive memories that they generate, the right to memory is perhaps also something for us to consider in our work. And then what he talks about as the debt of truth and what is entailed in living with radical loss. And I found this idea of the debt to truth also something that was quite profound in what it means to seek for radical freedom on the one hand as a desirable concept, but that is premised on the permanent destruction of another. So he's thinking really about this relationality between the power structures of who gets to repair and where the reparation lies, what the costs of that reparation are, but really from this time of what he names technomolecular colonialism. Also recently, I was in a jury with Shuddha for the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, and they had a really quite interesting, engaging structure for their forum, which was called As for Protocols. And I was thinking about our gathering and this question of protocols at a time when the disciplinary agency of state forces and algorithmic controls is rising, where those protocols are made for us and then bind us to mentally and physically to those external protocols. What sort of settings and negotiations do we then wish to undertake and narrate from at a time when, paradoxically, in many parts of the world, we know that sports stadiums, concert halls, clubs, and all kinds of other cultural spaces are closed, but in few spaces, in few parts of the world, there are still museums and exhibition spaces open. And so in a sense, that also leaves room for us to think through beyond the digital kind of rooms, what kind of protocols we wish to institute for cultural languages to proliferate, for the kinds of cultural gatherings that are coeval, perhaps, and that have still a sensuous intelligence attached to them, that may never be as popular as a filled up sports stadium. But what is it that can be compelling at such a time for an audience to enter the space of an exhibition? I keep returning to that, cycling back to also what I said the first day, for us to perhaps at this point not take any of that for granted in terms of continuing to remain operational, or imagine what it means to even suggest being operational in certain parts of the world. And I conclude also then on that note with Jibesh sharing on the first day to think of pandemic not only through an epidemiological mode, but rather as an epistemological one. And with that, face the challenges in terms of where each day the limits of the imagination are foreclosed or perhaps shaken. What does it mean to overcome rather than succumb to that impossibility of vision, the impossibility of prediction, and move towards sensing mechanisms that perhaps we can conceive of together?